hurt anymore. And now Rich is back, so I don't have to tell you anymore about my damaged wrist. For now, I should say.
There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. Just had some technical difficulties. That's what's supposed to happen in my world these days. So give me 2 more seconds, turn on a light.
We're talking about terrible sports injuries now, in case you're wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Conversation.
Yours. How is yours, by the way?
I'm great. I'm starting to feel like I have a thumb again, because I got 2 pens in my hand, but other than that, I'm doing great.
Awesome. All right. Can you make me a co-host so that I can project? I think you have to make me a co-host.
Mm-hmm. Give me 1 second. You are a host, Richard.
I am a host. All right.
Yep. Should be able to project whenever you need to.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Spotlight, edit profile, hide self, mute my audio. That's not what I want. There's the little bar. It's not showing up for me. Usually not this bad, folks. Apologize. There we go.
Got it?
Yep. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I want to sort of just pick up a little bit where we left off yesterday, and just see if there's any questions around the respect contract, right? If anybody, something sort of came to mind overnight, if you're wondering a little bit more about it, maybe someone tried it in a sales conversation. I'd love to hear any feedback, good or bad. If it didn't work, that's okay. So I'm just curious if any questions around all that. All right, Columbia, sweet. Is that Columbia the country, Frank, or Columbia like Missouri? So, wow, sweet. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move forward then, since there aren't any questions. So a couple of things I want to do today is I want to talk about some do's and don'ts. Yesterday, we talked about a couple of them. One in particular was this pre-qualifying the demo, right? So one of the don'ts that I really want to encourage people to do in sales is obviously don't wait till the last minute, right? And these are things like pre-qualifying the demo and determining next steps, which comes from, a little bit of the respect contract. And early in the respect contract, we talk a lot about making sure that we understand what's going to happen next, because so often we get to the end of a meeting and we've run out of time. So it's really, really important that you understand that you put that buffer in sooner than later. It's why I like to pre-qualify the demo. It's what I like about respect contracts. Even if there's not a demo, I always want to know, well, what happens next from your side, right? And I am even absolutely a fan of putting it in an agenda, particularly maybe on a second meeting or a third meeting. Putting it in the agenda is we're going to determine next steps. That way you don't forget to ask about it. So just another one of those tips. Some Hail Marys. I don't like Hail Marys. Hail Marys are those last attempts to try and make something happen when nothing's there, right? You're sort of down to the last, minute or two, and you're trying to say, well, gosh, should we get so-and-so involved, or trying to sort of send those emails of, oh, I think we're going to go in a different direction, and you're like, oh, well, I want to try and save it and see if I can still do that. So try not to throw Hail Marys. And the best example I can get, and this is not for me, I learned this from a woman, and I can't remember her name at the moment, but she talked a lot about helping to reduce the risk in decision making. That's our job as salespeople. Our job is to help people reduce risk. Anytime they're trying to buy something, there's a risk involved. Even when we buy something, I hope it fits right. I hope it looks good. I hope it's the right, I hope this, piece of electronic equipment doesn't break or doesn't cause trouble. Right? So I'm a big fan of even helping to tell them that I'm helping them reduce the risk. I've worked it into respect contracts, second meeting respect contracts, and finding ways to say, hey, look, I understand this is important to you. My goal here is to help you reduce the risk you feel in making this decision. If I do my job right, hopefully you choose me. But if you don't, then at least I've helped you reduce the risk and you can make a healthy decision for your organization. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that. And it builds trust, right? It's just like that line of, I don't want to do anything to make you look bad. I know there's a risk here. I'm going to help you reduce that risk, not make you look bad. And hopefully if I do it well, you'll choose me. Sometimes I don't win. I use those phrases and it works to build trust, but it's interesting. A couple of things will happen. One, people apologize for not choosing me, which is interesting. Two, I actually get more feedback if I'm not getting the business to say, hey, Richard, we really appreciate your help, but we're going here because I don't get it all the time. But I've built enough rapport that I can at least learn about myself. And I know that stuff will come back to me later. These people will come back, right? They will always, always come back to me 6 months, a year later, refer me to someone, all that kind of stuff. So try not to sound like everybody else, right? I think that's really, really important. A lot of people will take the stuff that I've done and they will actually use verbatim the stuff that I've written. And that's totally fine. I'm not opposed to that if you're comfortable with it. If you're not, make it your own authentic voice, right? Authenticity leads to empathy, right? There's no such thing as just, if you're just being empathetic for the sake of empathetic, then you're kind of faking it. I want you to be authentic in it and find your own voice and your own tone and your own phrase, right? That's really, really important for me. And then, of course, we've talked about this before, mentioned it in the respect contract. Obviously, John Barrows is sort of the godfather of this, in my opinion. But stop checking in, reaching out, touching base, circling back, following up, bubbling to the top. Just don't do it because you sound like everybody else. I can go and check everybody's emails and I'm sure they're there in your sent folder. And so what you say instead is to just say, hey, the purpose of this email is, the reason I'm emailing you is, status update requested, please. Those are very simple things that are very direct so that you can be sincere and honest, empathetic, but also use the rule of reciprocity, right? You're asking a very direct question that you want to know the answer to. If you want to know when you're getting the contract, great. Hey, purpose of this email is to see when we're going to get this contract back, right? In order for us to move forward, I need to know the date because we need to apply resources or we need to schedule resources. So, those are a couple of great ways to do it. You cannot, under any circumstance, say, hey, I'm following up to see when we're going to get the contract back. You have to get those words out of your vocabulary. And I've been teaching this 8 years now, since I first learned it. And I still have trouble. My fingers will still type just following up. So it takes time. So just be conscious of it, be aware of it, try to make some adjustments to it. So I'll pause for a second while I get my fresh coffee and see if there's any questions or comments so far. Thanks for keeping the chat going, by the way. I love it.
Hey, Richard, I got a quick question about the authenticity piece.
Yeah, go for it.
Sometimes folks struggle with this, this aspect of the sale. The part of authenticity is vulnerability, right? And you have to open up yourself a little bit as a sales rep to show them that, hey, this is a space you can be trusted in. And it's almost like showing a weakness, if you will, or talking about your product objectively can actually help build that rapport and authenticity.
How do you do that? Like what's your example? Because I don't disagree. I like to give people concretes.
Got it. So, I'll use my current role at Victory Lap. I'm, trying to help place sales candidates in really attractive roles. And so I'll talk to a VP of sales and let's say pre-COVID, they were like, hey, well, most of our sales division is out of, San Diego. We've got an office in Denver, but that's not really where our team is. And I could say something like, I totally get that. Right now we're training people in a, what's the word I'm looking for? Geographic perspective. So we've got folks in different hubs. However, these folks are trained to do remote work. And so if you're building out your remote team, or that's something you can do, we can continue that conversation. And it actually helps save time too, because if you call that objection out and just name it early, you can move past it or take the conversation where it needs to be. That's just one example, but it's kind of.
No, I think it's great. I think that's really important that you can call these things out. I think that's a big piece of the respect contract, which I don't know I know you were on a little bit yesterday, but one of the pieces in the very first conversation that I want people to have is to say, hey, Blake, look, if you ever decide we're not the right fit, just tell me. I don't need to waste your time. And likewise, if I discover I can't help you, I'll be the first to tell you, and I'll even point you in the direction of other people. So I talk about this all the time, and I think to your point, getting that vulnerability out there early is super impressive because it lets people know that you care. I mean, vulnerability means you care about them more than you do you. That's what's really, really important. So for example, if people come to me and say, Richard, we want you to come in and give, hey, I was on your training. Can you come in and, teach our team how to do what you did on, in your workbook and stuff like that and on your live training? I mean, I can, but I don't specialize in it. I don't have a program written for it. And I'll be the first to tell you that. This is Richard just doing what Richard kind of knows how to do. And I've never processed it in such a way. But I let people know that. And then it's up to them to decide if they want to trust me to figure out a way to do it. I do know people who know how to teach giving PowerPoint presentations. I just don't do it. For me, it's just one of those things I've sort of wing it ever since the beginning. But I love the approach and appreciate the suggestion.
There's a quick question I just wanted to address real quick from Scott. How do you stay authentic while maintaining a sense of professionalism? Well, first off, professionalism doesn't mean you erase your personhood. You're still a person. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. So don't feel like you have to remove yourself from the word professionalism. But very simply, my advice would be, it's a phrase in psychology, share, check, share. So as you're opening up, you kind of ratchet it up slowly. You don't give everything all at once. You just kind of take your time with that over the course of the conversation.
Define that a little bit more. I'm going to push you on that. Share, check, share.
Yeah. So you open up on something small, see how they respond. If you get a reciprocal sense of authenticity, vulnerability, then you can continue to move forward. At my last company, for instance, I was selling remote finance and accounting. So I'm talking to people about the nuts and bolts of their business. And I'd ask a question midway through the conversation, hey, Richard, what percentage of your top line revenue are you currently investing in finance and accounting? Now, they can answer that question a million different ways, but a lot of people would say, I'm not entirely sure. And then I can hit them with what the industry standard is. And then next time I have that credibility, I can share something a little bit more, and they're going to respond as well because they know I'm not using that information to hurt them, but to help them.
That's really cool. As you were saying, and I started thinking about it, and I remember, I think Gong ran this study about cursing, right? That as soon as someone curses in a sales conversation in the right moment, it kind of releases a tremendous amount of tension, and it becomes authentic. I am not a proponent of walking out there and start cursing up a storm, but I've been known to drop an occasional F-bomb or S-bomb, and in traditional sort of old school sales, as soon as I hear the prospect say it, I then know I will use it as well at some point. And I think that aligns with what you're saying, but I'm not advocating for people to do that. So please make sure you don't walk off training and say, Richard said I should start cursing at every little thing. Don't do that. That's not professional. So as my wife walks by and rolls her eyes at me wondering what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and talk about pace and tone, right? So we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I want to get into it very deeply today, right? There is this sense of trying to play it cool and going low and slow. 25% less. Just a real quick question. How many people, go into the chat box, how many people, if you listen to a podcast or an audiobook, what speed do you listen to it on? Go in and tell me. There it is, right? I'm a 1.4 to 1.5 guy. I can't go faster. So this is good because we're trying to be effective with our time, right? We're trying to be efficient. There's a challenge here, though, is that it also encourages us to talk faster, which we already do as salespeople. So slow yourself down, right? So it's really important because salespeople, we are known to be fast talkers. When we slow it down, we actually build credibility more so than when we speed it up. When we speed it up, we sound like everybody else. So just be mindful of that and where some of that comes from. We talked about this yesterday. The script is not a 4-letter word. It is very, very helpful to have a script. But there's a huge difference between having a script and sounding scripted. Once you commit it to memory, it's no longer going to sound scripted. So, Liz, I like that. Slow down, calm down, don't hurry. Yep. So I think that's really good. There's another one out there that I like called be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. The less we say, the more impactful it can become if we know the right script. So, tone. The best tone for me is sort of naturally curious. We're going to walk through a bunch of different tones in a minute. Being genuine and supportive, confident. And I always do want people to test their tone. It's interesting over time, as a Gen Xer, the more I've worked with millennials, is that I've learned that they're more naturally curious. They're a little bit more genuine and supportive, and they're definitely more confident. I've been paying attention to Gen Z and we actually, on the Surf and Sales podcast that just released Monday, we had a professor of sales at University of Texas in Dallas, and he talked about Gen Z, and the studies are showing that Gen Z is much more coin operated like Gen X. So they are going to walk into the workplace and change the world differently than what we've been doing with millennials. So it's going to be an interesting shift back towards the Gen Xers of the world, where we were all just coin operated. What are you going to pay me to get this done? Right? My time is valuable. What are you going to pay me? Right. So it's interesting. And I think it's one of the reasons I've liked working with millennials so much, because I'm not naturally curious. I'm not as genuine and supportive, believe it or not by nature anyway. I've had to learn that skill. And so it's nice and refreshing to work with folks who expect that level of genuine and support and curiosity and confidence. So it's one of the reasons I've liked working with millennials for so long. Control and influence, right? Remember, we can control a process. We cannot control people. We can influence people, right? I am controlling this process of this entire sales training for the last 2 days, 100% control, right? But I can't control anybody who's listening. I'm hoping I can influence you. Even if I influence you to stick to what you're doing because you disagree with me, then I've influenced you to be better at who you want to be. And I'm okay with that. You don't have to do it Richard's way just because Richard said so, right? That's the worst thing you can ever do. So yeah, Scott, we're gonna talk about testing your tone in a second. I'm gonna give you examples of tones that you can use. But that, I want people to understand that definition of control versus influence. For me, sales is a lot about being altruistic, right? And we hear it a lot, particularly in the interview. Why do you like sales? Well, I like helping people. Okay, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. That's an important piece. I've been lucky enough in my life to actually sell education software, which was probably the most altruistic sale I ever did, because I literally was helping kids. So if any of you have ever done Oregon Trail, Carmen San Diego, Reader Rabbit, Kid Picks, if any of you went through that, it was my sales team that was selling that into the school districts. And there was a great amount of altruism to know that we were helping kids learn. And I think a lot of people look for that in a product or service that they're selling. But that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to be altruistic, help people. And if we do that, we don't have to sell very much, right? We don't have to sort of push them. You might have to encourage them, but you don't have to sort of go into that traditional sales mindset. So a great tone to use is one like you're asking for and giving direction. So this is just one example, Scott. And this goes back to being vulnerable. The Blake was talking about is that when you ask for directions, oftentimes we feel lost. We have a certain level of anxiety. We have to expose, ourselves as a vulnerability that, oh my gosh, I'm lost, I need help. Well, that's a really important tone. Then when you give directions, that's very altruistic. Oh, I'm sorry, you're lost. Let me help you. Go down here 2 blocks, look for the church on the left. The stop sign's going to be there. Take a right at the stop sign. Go 2 more blocks, wait for the yellow light, whatever it is, the flashing light. Those are the kinds of things that's a type of tone that you can use. And I use that a lot in sales conversations. So we're going to dig in a little bit more. So, yep, this is why you got dysentery. I like that. So that's funny. So these are different paces and tones that you can use, right? And they overlap. There's no right or wrong, but these are the kinds of things you could try. And to a certain extent, you could say, hey, when I want to pre-qualify the demo, which tone should I use, right? Should I use a leading tone, a hypothetical tone, or a lost tone? Maybe it's a combination of them. So curiosity tone, this is the one that's often open-ended questions because you're trying to show them that you're interested in them. You're trying to learn more about them. And specifically, you're going to use open-ended questions to get there, right? Lost tone, clarifying buzzwords and industry jargon. So this is the one where people come to me and they say, hey, Richard, I've got 6 SDRs and 4 AEs, and I need sales training. And I go, I hear sales training all the time. Like, what does that mean for you? Like, I'm lost. Help me understand your definition of sales training, right? That's a really, that's an example of that. Paraphrasing tone. Again, I think we all know this. So, Scott, if I heard you correctly, you said these are your 4 or 5 biggest challenges. Is there something else I'm missing? That's your paraphrasing tone. Hypotheticals. These are really good. You got to be careful where you use the hypothetical. If you use it too early in the sales process, or if you try to use it in a cold call as part of the script, if it's not done well, it comes off the wrong way. Right? Now, if you've gone through a demo, or you're in the middle of the demo and you want to see where things are, then by all means, you can say, hey, I'm going to pause here in the demo. How does this compare to what you're currently doing? Right? That's a good sort of hypothetical tone. Now you're putting them into use of your product or service, and you're getting into their mind, into their headspace, and trying to understand what they're really, really thinking. Leading tone, right? Do you think this could be better or worse? Is this better or worse? Direct tones, a lot of times closed-ended questions come there, right? So closed-ended questions sort of coming in and saying, so it seems like we should move forward. What do you think? If you're going, instead of following up, checking in, reaching out, touching base, which is often a misguided curiosity tone, be more direct. Hey, so I don't bother you anymore, Scott. I'd just like to know, where do we stand on things? It's very direct. If you've gotten to that by the way, if you've gotten to that point in the conversation where you want to ask that question, you've earned the right to ask that question, in my opinion. So then you have the reflective tone. This is my favorite one to use. I particularly use it a lot around pricing. Whenever I give out pricing, we'll pause for a second. I'll talk about how I give out pricing. I want to know how someone feels about things, because feelings are where decisions are made, right? If you go all the way back to yesterday, to the child ego state, right? Remember, the child ego state is where your feelings are stored. It talks about, I want it. And I need to know how much they want it. So, for example, this is not my pricing, but just roll with me here. So Blake, can you jump off mute and join me in a role play for a second?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Blake, let's assume you and I have gone through our discussions of training, sales training and what I do. And I want you to go ahead and say, hey, Richard, that's great. Ask me for the price, Blake, is what I want you to do.
I can do that. That's great, Richard. How much is it going to cost, though?
Hey, really good question, Blake. So I'll be super direct about it. I'm very transparent. I don't charge by the head. For the 5-week training program with training and reinforcement is $20,000. How does that pricing feel?
It's definitely just outside of my budget, but I'd like to hear more about what kind of value this is going to provide my business.
So a couple of things. Pricing is always a feeling, right? We always know that there's an emotional decision when you pay for anything, right? So, for example, you can get one of my N.E.A.T shirts if you go to my Patreon group. You join Patreon and I send you a free shirt. It's $10 a month. If you want it, go for it. So now you've got to go, oh, that's kind of cool. I like Richard. I'd like to be a part of his Patreon group. And yeah, I'll get a free t-shirt. I know that you feel like you're getting value for that. Here's the beautiful part about that feeling phrase. Nobody can resist it. Nobody can resist how to answer it. And in a negotiation tactic, that's what I need to know. I need to know how they feel. Even Blake's answer gave me a ton of insight. There was one, he paused because now I had to make him think. Then he said, well, it's just outside my budget. Okay. Well, now I know there's a budget, right? Fair, right? I need to know that. But there's still some level of interest. Now, that doesn't mean Blake's going to buy me. It might indicate that he's going to go and look at someone else, or he's talked to other people. So my response might be to Blake, and Blake, jump back again on this. Let's keep the role play going. Hey, Blake, I totally understand, that response, and I appreciate the candor. Just out of curiosity, what else have you seen in the marketplace?
We shopped around for things. I've seen some options that are 3x this. I think that might be a little too large for our size. And the other options are kind of the lower end of the spectrum. They just don't really satisfy in terms of what we're trying to accomplish.
Great. So now I just closed Blake. Thank you. We did not plan this, by the way. This was, no. He said I'm outside his budget, but he also said the other stuff is too expensive and the other stuff that's less expensive isn't as robust. I don't need to negotiate.
Did it with myself.
Right. But what I didn't do was, oh, well, what's in your budget? What is your budget? I can come back. That's an easy question to get to. Right. I don't want to get to that answer yet, but I think we're often coached to do those things, right? And so maybe it's my second or third question. Maybe it'll be my next question of, oh, okay, now that I understand what you're looking at, just out of curiosity, what's your budget? Now, here's also a beautiful piece. Most likely in that kind of a scenario, when people tell me what their budget is, they think they're negotiating with me. I'm not negotiating my price any lower. I just need to know what their budget is, right? And then I can say to Blake, hey, you know what? I appreciate that. As you've already said from what you've seen, the market dictates my price. So it seems like my price is pretty fair. And again, I can go back to this fair and feeling, the F-bombs of sales, and see what people think. So anyway, so my goal here is on this exercise, and Blake, thanks for jumping in and going through that with me. The goal of this, one is to understand pace and tone, but then the other is to make sure you understand how to use it effectively around this pricing conversation. Pricing conversations are always a feeling. Just because someone says it's not in their budget doesn't mean it's not in their budget. It just means that's what the spreadsheet says, right? My business is not dictated by someone else's spreadsheet. And I have to know that internally. I might not go out and say it that directly. I might not be that callous about it. I've had to twice in the last 2 years. I've had to sort of say, hey, your spreadsheet doesn't dictate my price. But I want people to understand how to look at the pricing conversation and give yourself just a little breathing room to explore and do more discovery before you get into the, for lack of a better phrase, we often think it's two critical parents criticizing each other. That's not the case. Most pricing conversations are child to child, right? So our job is to be the adult and let the child negotiate against themselves. If you've got kids, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of times I do with my kids, hey, you can either, go take your shower right now and I'll give you 15 more minutes, or you can have, on the iPad or whatever, or you can have 5 more minutes on the iPad and then go take your shower. They negotiate against themselves. Like I don't have to get so heavily involved. So anyway, so let's go ahead and move forward onto the, unless there's any questions. Does anything else come up, Blake, in the chat?
No, I'm not seeing anything. Just making sure I'm hearing that correct. It's almost like providing optionality. So you give them a couple of options and allow them to weigh it against themselves instead of their option and your option type thing.
Depends on what part of the conversation you're in. I kick off the conversation by giving the price and then immediately saying, how does that feel? I don't want to know how it compares. I don't want to know how it, if that's in their budget. I just want to know how it feels, because they will give, to your point earlier, they now have to be vulnerable, right? And by the time I've gotten to pricing, I've earned the right to ask this question, right? If someone says, how much does it cost? I've earned the right to ask any question I want about how they came up with whatever number they came up with. And so it's a really important piece. And again, this is one of those things where you can't control people. I can't control their budget. I can't make them go get more money, but I can influence it. I can influence their approach to it. And that's my goal there. All right, open and closed-ended questions. We know this, right? We know that they cannot be answered with yes or no. So let's see, when the question is asked, is in the flow of conversation? Yes, it is important. Who knows? Go in the chat and tell me one of the most, now if you've been through my training, don't cheat. What's the most important thing about open and closed-ended questions, aside from the yes or no? Anybody? Let's see. Placement. They force them to talk. You learn something new. Yep. Christopher, think about it a different way. Christopher, when you say you force them to talk, what else does that do? Getting information. Yep. We listen. Fayez said it, right? Most important thing about open-ended questions is it forces salespeople to shut up, right? I even use one now, right? Hey, everybody, what's the most important thing about open and closed-ended questions? And I let everybody come in and start chiming in. It allows me a moment to sit back, listen, or at least watch what's coming through on the chat so I can determine where that conversation is going to go. It creates space, right? It's the difference between, and I know this will probably speak to generations, but it's the difference between having one space after a period and 2 spaces after a period. Right? I understand there's a whole world right now saying, go to 1 space after a period, and frankly, I don't really care. But there's a difference between 1 space and 2 space. People have been complaining about it for eons. But in sales, I want that 2 spaces after a period. I want a breathing moment. I want to see where it's going to go, right? So that's the most important thing in my mind about open and closed-ended questions. Because of that, I can now do strategic thinking. I can listen. I can sit back and watch the comments come in and make sure, sorry, my neighbor's coming over. Have fun, bud. I can now think strategically around what needs to be done, what direction I want that conversation to go in, how I can influence that conversation. Rule of reciprocity. If I ask an open-ended question, people feel obligated to answer it. That's a very specific one. If I ask a really good open-ended question, they're going to put more thought into it. Open-ended questions do give your prospects a ton amount of control, a ton of control, right? It lets them be in control, which I'm okay with. It lets them feel in control, which I'm okay with. But ultimately, I'm still in control of where the conversation is going because I've got more time to think strategically about how I want to respond. And then, to Chris Voss' point of perspective, it helps customers admit and solve their own problems. So that's a really important thing to understand. We're going to dive in a little bit more on the closed-ended questions and the values and the strategies you need to pay attention to regarding those. So these are your open-ended questions, right? Who, what, where, why, when, how, and which, right? That's it. If you can find another one, I'll pay you $50 and I'll send you a free t-shirt. I don't know of any other open-ended questions. This is not all, but these are some of the closed-ended questions, right? Is, are, would, could, should, would, do, can, right? If. Here's what I want folks to know about closed-ended questions. When you ask a closed-ended question, they force the person hearing the question into a rational mindset. It's either yes or no, right? So you're forcing them into into an adult ego state. Should we move forward? Yes or no? What's the next part of the conversation? Yes or no, right? Are we moving forward, right? Now, here's the problem. This is the part you got to understand. If you ask the closed-ended question too soon, it will force someone into a rational point of view, which is good. But if it's too soon, the rational point of view makes them want to stay with the status quo, right? And the status quo often means doing nothing or staying where they're at. The best example I can give of this is, in a dating world, is, when one of you decides you want to be in a more committed relationship and the other one's still not ready for that, right? You're forcing them to answer yes or no. Are we going to go steady? Are we, going to take this to the next level, right? All those kind of, do you want to move in together? Well, it forces them into a rational frame of mind. If there's not enough trust and love and care there, then they're going to go, I still want to keep dating you, but I'm not ready to move in yet. That's a fair answer. It's an honest answer. Doesn't mean they're going to go, start dating somebody else, but they're happier in the status quo. So that's what I really want folks to understand about closed-ended questions. They're really good, right? So back to that role play I was doing with Blake, I could have gone two different directions. He sort of said I was right in the middle, which is actually where I really do position myself. But I could have either said, okay, great, Blake, how would you like to proceed from here? Which is an open-ended question, which would have let him go forward, right, and make a decision that he feels is comfortable. I could have also said, great, so can we go ahead and sign a contract? Well, Blake may have been, whoa, I'm not ready to sign a contract. I'm just telling you how I feel about the pricing. That's what I'm talking about in open and closed-ended questions. That's where those emotions come in. That's where those feelings come in. And I know I'm ranting for a bit, but I really want people to walk away understanding this. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if anybody has a question or comment. If anybody's got hey, Richard, I'm in this unique scenario. What kind of questions should I ask? I'm happy to, do a little bit of a role play for something in your pipeline if you want to talk about it.
Richard, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I wanted to add, so I studied communications in college. That was my major. And one of the things that I learned is simply, your questions are the building blocks for effective conversation. And the quality of your answers is typically in direct proportion to the quality of your question. So in sales, the first thing I would teach someone is, when in doubt, ask a great question, because it gives you information. It gives you something to build off of. It's a very kind of improv type.
How do you? So I love it, but here's the challenge I have, Blake. So I'm going to push you on this, and I want you to push back. If I'm in sales and I'm unsure, and so I need to ask a great question, do I have the right mental capacity in that moment to not panic because I'm unsure, and then realize what the right great question is? Or should we always have a couple of great questions in our pocket, in our back pocket, so to speak?
So the answer is kind of yes to both. As you get further along with your company and your product, you'll start to have pet questions. That question of what percent are you spending on revenue? I got to that maybe month 6, month 8 of my tenure. But what I would also say to folks, particularly the one that might be a little nervous or anxious, for whatever you lack as a sales rep in terms of sales acumen and some of the jargon, you can make up for that by just being naturally curious. And if you stay in that state of curiosity, great questions come from that. Think about it. Anytime you're interested in something.
So Blake, I'm going to push you hard, right? 'Cause you know me. I don't like buzzwords.
This is great. It lets me know if my shit actually works or not. So,
Well, I know you well enough to know your shit works. What I want to know is, that sounds great. That sounds fantastic coming out of a textbook. Stop talking like a textbook, Blake. Tell me what that means. Give us all an example of what you mean there, Blake.
So we've kind of touched on it a little bit. You can ask, how do you feel about your current product, or do you like your current product? No. Okay. What don't you like about your current product? Maybe it's level 2. And they'll tell you, it's too slow. Okay. How does it make you feel when your current product is slow? And what were some of the things that you'd be able to do with the time that we can give you? So now I'm acknowledging that problem. I'm putting them in a place where they are actually doing my job for me by thinking through, how are they going to make my life better?
Yep.
And they either will give me a great answer that I didn't think of, or I'll be able to give them one.
But so I want to come back to you, right? You said earlier, I've got to have a list of great questions. If I'm so imagine I'm gone through my onboarding, I've gone through my training, I've sat in on some calls and I've listened to some Gong and Chorus and Sales Loft and all those kinds of things, listened to some stuff. What are my go-to first set of questions? Do I have 3 that I know I can always ask?
I would say yeah, because if you're selling something, there's typically always a problem of some sort or a solution they'd like to improve. You need to know how much it's going to cost. You got to talk about price, value, and that. And any sort of objections. I mean, those are just kind of fundamentals of a sale.
So these are the questions that I would tell you, and I agree with you. But you're still giving me textbooks answers. Okay. It's all right. Sorry. These are the questions that I try to keep available for me. What does that mean to you? Sorry, I don't know who that is. So that's the best question I can ask is, when you say that, what does that mean to you? Because whatever somebody tells me, oh, our sales training sucks. Okay, well, what does that mean? Right? Richard, we need better negotiation training. Great. What does that mean? Richard, we need to train our sales team on how to close better. Great. What does that mean at your company? So what does that mean is a really simple question. And it allows you, again, to get in their headspace. People buy stories. And when people buy a story, it really means they're buying a picture. I need them to paint the picture that's in their mind that's getting lost in the, this much space between their brain and their mouth. They're no longer, I need to see that picture. Give me an example of not closing. You'd be surprised how many times people ask me for closing training and they can't give me an example, which is okay. I actually want them to go there because it's not the closing skills that suck. That's not the problem. It's the qualification and discovery skills that suck. They're not doing a good job at the front end that makes the back end so bad. But I have to make them realize that. So what's an example of that? Can you tell me more about what that means? Help me understand what's prompting. These are the 3 or 4 questions to Blake's point. Like, I would never have thought about it, and I'm not picking on you, Blake. I would never have thought about it in this sort of communications major conceptual strategy of things, right?
Throwing all my books away after this, by the way.
No, do not.
I own.
Do not. What I want you to do, though, is I want you to go and grab the highlighter and go, oh, that's what that means, right? So I'm all about tactical, right? I talk a little bit about strategy and training, as you guys know, but then we go, well, what's it going to sound like? And I ask everybody to share their stories here because I want it to be meaningful to you and that in your world. And if you think about it, yesterday when we did the role plays, people like hearing that. They want to hear the story, not the concept Richard's been talking about. So go ahead and ask a question. If someone's got something where you're stuck on a deal and you're like, hey, Richard, what question should I ask? Go ahead and raise your hand and Blake will let you in. And I see that coming in, Scott, so give me 1 second. The last thing I want to say, and again, this comes from Voss, which I didn't know until he said it, is that why is a very dangerous question, right? It can put people on the defensive. Why do you want to solve this problem? Why'd you choose that? company over our company. You know, now you're making people justify and defend their previous decisions that were bad decisions. Or maybe not, maybe they had the results they didn't want. But in either case, they feel bad about that decision. So be mindful with why questions. If you can properly formulate a why is this important now versus maybe 6 months ago, I can justify using a why question. But otherwise, I try to avoid it as much as I can. I see a question coming in a demo, what tone are you using and what questions are you using and when? All right, so I don't necessarily do demo training, so I'll give you my opinion, Scott, and everybody else can chime in and tell me if you like what I'm saying, and if you don't, that's okay too. Please tell me and say, Richard, here's my thought on that. So one, there are two parts to the demo, right? First of all, you've got to pre-qualify. You got to ask people ahead of time. You got to define and even say this ahead of time. Hey, Scott, you know, before we get into this demo, I want to make sure you know that I'm trying to give you a demo. I don't want it into product training. And in my mind, Scott, product training means I try to show you all 60 things that we do, that I jump into every use case and show you how to use the product in a specific scenario. I'm happy to do that on a couple of things, but I don't want to bore you with product training. So I want to understand the difference between demo and product training. Scott, it's kind of like when you test drive a car. You're not test driving to figure out how to program the radio dial, what stations you want to program. You'll figure that out later if you buy the car. Right now, you're just trying to get a sense of it. So I just want you to understand what I'm doing in this demo. So now I've laid the groundwork on the demo. I've used a little bit of a leading tone, right? If you go back to the tone paces, I'm setting it up. I'm going to get some buy-in. I'm probably going to be able to use a closed-end question to force him into a rational mind, because Scott's probably going to agree of like, yeah, I don't want to see all that shit either, right? So, and that's the first thing I would do. The next thing I would do, Scott, is I would say, well, you know, before we start jumping in, what do you want to see? What are your biggest pains we're trying to solve for, so that I can make sure we highlight that part in the demo? So walking through that, understanding a little bit of qualification. And then the last thing, please stop. This is the worst closed-ended question ever. And this will prove everything I just said about closed-ended questions. Stop asking, does that make sense? Yes, it makes sense. You just showed it to them. It made sense. But that's actually not the question you really want to know, right? So 99.9% of the time, does that make sense, is the single worst question you could ever ask. And you have to be really conscious to stop asking it. What you can say instead is, how does this compare to what you're currently doing? Hey, Scott, I'm going to pause here in the demo, and I want to understand, as you look at this, based on what you're trying to accomplish, how good of a job does this show you that we can do? How much can we support you, right? So get rid of, does that make sense? It's worse, in my opinion, than checking in, reaching out, and touching base. And the reason it's worse is because you're actually in a sales conversation. You're missing a chance. If you ask too many, does that make sense? Guess what you get? A big, fat, dark, no response, ghosting customer. Find out what makes sense. Find out how this compares. Find out how this relates, right? It doesn't, you're almost always going to get, in fact, I don't know if I've ever gotten anybody to say, no, that doesn't make sense. I'd have to think about that hard. Rarely does that ever happen. So you're missing a tremendous opportunity to actually get buy-in, to get real confirmation, right? Does that make sense? It's a closed-ended question. It forces a rational mindset. It forces them into the mindset of, yeah, it makes sense. Let's just get on with it because you're boring me. That's what the answer really means. So you got to use it to probe there. So I'm going to pause for a second. I saw a couple things come in through the chat. Anything that's a question, Blake?
No, I think we covered it. You talked about the tone and demo. Just one, if you have those 3 questions, those 3, 4 handy that you shared with me.
Yeah, so one of them is, how does this compare, right? What does this mean, or what does blank mean? When you say blank, what do you mean by that? Another one is, when you say that, what use case are you talking about? so I can understand better. So,
can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
Which one? I think
use case. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I think, so oftentimes I might be lumping the demo question and the does that make sense piece with the previous part. So bear with me. Is people think in use cases, right? They think in stories. They always do stories, right? They buy stories. So there's a use case, there's a picture. Get them to paint you that picture, right? Greatest role play I ever do with my sales teams, whenever I had them, they can't use the computer. How did I train people to give demos? Do it without the computer. Make them paint a picture with their words, right? Do it all the time. It's a really fun exercise. It's hard. It's awkward. But then what ends up happening is they have to engage a different part of their brain and stop using the demo as a crutch.
I was going to say, I agree with Marcus. Use case definitely sounds textbook, but maybe that's just from hanging around me too long.
Could be. So that's fine. Find a different phrase, right? How do you currently handle this situation? And it could be that I'm jaded enough, particularly because most of my clients are in SaaS, that use case is a very common word. So if you don't like the buzzword, I'm okay with it. So
Ben's got a question around a comparison. How do you deal with that if the customer's got a better product?
Well, then you have to acknowledge it, right? We talked earlier about being vulnerable. So there's a couple of things that I would tell you to do. Because if your competitor's better than you, they're going to try and set landmines for you. They're going to try and set a landmine with your prospect. Oh, we do this better than that, right? So if someone comes along and they say, well, your competitor does this, can you do that? My response is very, very honest. And the answer is, no, we don't do that. But let me ask you this, Lynn. How important is that feature in you making this decision? And if it's super important, well, I need to know that. I might turn around and say, hey, Lynn, that's a great question. No, we can't do that yet. It's on our roadmap. So here's where we're better than them. Which of these two things matter the most to you, Lynn? Right. So I got it. It's called question behind the question is the technique. I think we'll talk about it a little bit later today, but it's super important that when someone asks you a question, you give an honest and direct answer. And then you ask them a question back. Hey, Lynn, that's a great question. No, we can't do that. Just out of curiosity, what made you ask that question? Because guess what? There's a picture in Lynn's mind that she's running around me versus them. There's some sort of, I call it the Best Buy columns of comparison shopping, right? There's something going on there. Well, I need to know all the other stuff other than that one little feature. But my favorite thing on the competitive one is to say, hey, that's a really good question. No, we don't do that. How important is that to you making this decision? So, I'm not opposed to John's point about, John, what are you thinking? I want to, I think it's situational. It's not a bad question. But in a comparison situation, in a competitive situation, I always want to know specifically when I lose. And I want to know exactly why I lose. So they brought it up, so I'm going to keep pushing them there. I need to know how good I am or how bad I am so I can go back to my product marketing team and say, we just lost this deal. Go fix it. Right? That's not on me. That's not on me as a salesperson. If someone else's product or service is better than mine, and I've got a product team or an engineering team that builds it, there is no magic sales fairy dust. As much as your CEOs might think so. Any other questions? That was a really good one, Lynn. I appreciate you asking it. I hope that was helpful to you. Cool. All right, it's 9:04. We've been going at it in an hour. Let's take a 10-minute break. Does that sound good? Thanks, John. I appreciate the role play comment. But everybody, step away from the computer, grab some coffee, grab something to eat, do what you need to do, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. For those who are there, I'm back. We're a few minutes early. We're not getting started. But if anybody has a question, they want to jump on and chat with me, or they want to just put it in the chat box, I'm happy to do it. Are not open about issues about how to navigate such conversations? It's a great question, Sonia. In the humorous answer, yes, I think customers lie. But to your point, I think it's more about them not being open. And it's just like any other relationship. You haven't built the trust, right? I'm not going to go on a first or second date with someone and expose everything. I'm not going to go out and tell them, every one of my idiosyncrasies. So I think you have to earn the right to figure those things out. That's what respect contracts for, Sonia. And I think that's where you use open-ended questions, right? Do they blatantly lie outright? Probably the biggest lie I get is, no, we aren't looking at anybody else, right? But even then, on occasion, that's actually been the truth. But the important thing is that I ask the question. I ask, what else have you seen in the marketplace, right? That to me is what I want people to do. Do they lie about the budget? Sure, of course they do. Nobody walks in and says, here's what my budget is, any more than we walk on a car lot and tell people how much we're willing to spend. So I hope that answers it. How do you navigate the conversation, Sonia? One, a respect contract does it. Two, understanding the psychology, right? The parent, child, adult ego state helps. And then finally, I think that understanding just at the simplest level, how to ask open and closed-ended questions, right? You've got to earn the right to get those answers. And you got to earn the right to ask those questions so that then you know which questions to ask. Matt's asking, when you're talking about a competitor having a superior product, how do you manage that when it's related to specific areas of the product? Matt, I might have you come off mute and explain that a little bit more. There's a picture in your mind, I can tell, and I want you to paint a better picture.
Richard, hold up one sec. You want me to take Matt off mute?
Yeah, let's take Matt off. We're just answering some questions for people who are coming back.
Schulman, right?
Yes.
All right, he should be off mute.
What's up, Matt?
Hey, thank you. How are you guys?
I'm good, man.
Great.
Where are you dialing in from?
New York.
All right. Stay safe over there.
Definitely. So framework I'm thinking in this use case is, I know just before the break you were talking about a product efficiency being like really on the product team and that side of things.
Sure.
Thinking across whether it's a SaaS platform or anything, at the point of product, there's especially with how many competitors are out there right now in any given space. How do you best manage specific areas and specific features, benefits that someone else is clearly better than your product in, but knowing that the overall value you bring might be greater?
Well, I think you just do what you just said, right? You have to sort of turn around and say, hey, Matt, and let me ask you this question. in you asking that question, has your prospect asked you about these differences, or is this about, well, how do I navigate this ahead of time before they ask me, or how do I navigate this ahead of time so they don't go dark on me when they do talk to my competitor? Like, where's your mindset around this conversation?
Yeah, good question. I think it was on the if it hasn't come up, but I think what you just said was part of the answer and probably a better way to play it of how do you put it on the table like yourself ahead of time to really get in front of that objection before it comes up from them.
Yeah, I think there's a nuance to it, right? This is the part where it does depend. I think you sort of need to, you need to throw a fishing line out, right? And say, so what else have you seen in the marketplace, right? You could also ask the question, hey, of everything that I've shown you or we've talked about so far, what about my product? What problems do you have that you haven't seen me show in my product, right? What concerns you're like, oh, that's nice, Matt, but is there something that you do want solved that I haven't shown you yet? And what is that so I can make sure we address it?
Cool. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, those are the kinds of, now, even then, you're still dancing around the problem, right? So you have to decide, Matt, to be able to say, hey, Richard, look, it sounds like you're still in the investigative stage. And they'll go, yeah. Good, great. Well, here are the 3 biggest competitors you're going to find. And here's where we stack up against them, right? And again, you almost want product marketing to go and build your Best Buy 3 product comparison and show all the check boxes that you have versus they have, right? Now, whether or not you show that to everybody is a that's a game time decision, right? But don't run behind well, we don't want to tell everybody to go look at our competitors. Look, I don't know anybody who's spending 5, 10, 15, or 20 grand who's not looking at the competitors. So to pretend like they're not going to discover it, I mean, you can play that game, but that to me, that's not honest, right? So, there it is. Share, check, share. There you go. See, there's the textbook. Blake, don't throw away your textbooks. So thank you. Anyway, so Matt, I hope that answers your question a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Cool. All right. We're going to jump back in unless anybody else has another question. All right. So we're going to go through the F-bombs of sales. So these are the F words that I use a lot, right? And this is what I know about each one of these words. This is where sales occurs, trust is built, it's honored, it's respected, and it's where you've earned the sale, right? You've earned the right to even ask for the sale when you start thinking about these F-bombs. So decisions are going to be based on every one of these. Your next steps are confirmed by it. This is what pricing's all about. We've already talked about it. We always hear this, well, you got to trust your gut. Well, you got to figure this stuff out. And I think this is going to come back to what Matt just talked about in the second one of them. And in the simplest thing, it's open and close into questions, right? There's a whole other, look, there's mirroring and labeling and all these other great psychological techniques that have been around for eons. But it really does come down to open and closed into questions and that tone, those different tones that you can use. So when we talked about feelings, right, we talked about how to use feelings and price, right? And it's a really, really important one. Talk about fairness, right? If you go back to respect contract from yesterday, I use the word fair in one spot. You can't overuse this word, right? If you overuse it, then you're constantly making it sound like you're being unfair, which is not helpful, which is not what your prospects want, right? You're going to send the wrong message. But you can use fairness, I think, once in the beginning. I think you can use it again when you start talking about pricing, right? I don't want to know, though, if someone thinks my pricing is fair. I want to know how they feel about it. then I can work towards what fair means in terms of pricing. Fear, right? If there's anything I've hoped that's come across is that if we don't ask these questions, if we don't apply some level of N.E.A.T or some other sales process, and we don't ask open and closed-ended questions, and we don't do things, we're running our sales process through fear of hoping they don't figure something out. Well, I don't know any relationship, business or personal, where that works really well. Just doesn't, I don't know, right? I hope someone doesn't find this out about me, right? So now that doesn't mean you need to also go and expose the entire world and be overly vulnerable, right? And I'll give you a real world example. At some point when you're dating someone, maybe you are, you've had a substance abuse issue. Well, I can understand you don't want to, there's some fear in sharing that with somebody. I can understand you don't need to go tell someone that in the first, second, third, fifth date. I can understand that some people are like, hey, I got to put this out there soon enough, right? So that they know. But I don't want people to build all their decisions based upon the fear and being afraid to not ask questions. And then there's the friend zone. The friend zone is what I call ghosting, right? If someone's ghosted you, you're in the friend zone. And if you're in the friend zone, it's because you haven't let your emotions come through. You've been hoping they'd ask you out as opposed to you asking them out. So we've got to stay away from that friend zone. The reason we go into the friend zone is because we fear the bad answer. We fear getting something back that we don't want to hear, right? I think we've all heard it before, is that, no is the second best answer in sales, right? I've used this before in the past. I've shied away from it, but if you like it, go for it. I don't do maybes. Yes or no, I don't do maybes, right? Hey, Matt, we're going to talk next week. Looking forward to it. We've been working on this for the last 6 weeks. My expectation next week, Matt, is to, I'd like to get a yes or no. I don't really like doing maybes because I don't want to have to chase you, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You can say that as a salesperson, right? I used to use I don't do maybes in my respect contract, right? I used to say, hey, look, at several points through this process today and then forward, I'm going to be looking for yes and no answers because I don't want to do maybes. Every time I hear maybe, it means I'm going to have to check in, follow up, reach out, touch base with you. Granted, you're not always going to have a yes or no answer, but at some point I am going to want us to sort of decide to move forward or not. Okay. A different way to use the respect contract, right? So was I a Sandler guy at one point? No, I was not a Sandler guy at one point. I've read the book, but the stuff's been around for a long time. I like Sandler. I think they're one of the better methodologies out there. The challenge I've had with Sandler is that it feels a little dated. If they're still, I don't know if they still are or not, but if they're still talking about Columbo, most people on this line don't even know what Columbo is. I barely do, and I'm a Gen Xer. So, but a lot of their stuff is good. But let's be super honest too, is that not a lot has changed in sales since, I don't know, maybe the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. So they're still obsessed with Columbo. Excellent, great. That's job security for me. So, guys, let's hold on to this question. It's a great question, calling versus emailing. Let's go forward to the next thing, and then we'll actually, before we go on, one, any questions around feelings, fairness, friend zone, fear, and what's more effective, calling or emailing? And I'll tell you why I don't like that, Marcus, by the way. There is no what's more effective. It's all effective. Sales has always been a multi-touch, multi-channel process, right? Back in the day, you used to buy an ad in the Yellow Pages. You might put an ad in the newspaper, and you might buy some radio spots. And you would make cold calls, right? That's what you would do. You drop off your media kit. You'd send it out in traditional mail, right? Traditional email is just like old mail. So now the question is, what's the most effective way to do it? There is no effective way, right? There is no, let me rephrase that. It's going to take a lot of data science and AI to determine what's the most effective way. And it's going to take a lot of thoughts around what industry you're selling, what's your average sales price, what's your customer size. So there should be data out there. And I think the better question, Baz, is, and I hope I pronounce your name right. If not, I apologize. I think the better question is, what is the human capacity in a 1 to 3 call close, assuming I have the right data? What's the human capacity of a mid-market sale that's 3 to 6 months and the average sales price is, $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year? How many companies and people can I effectively manage through a platform like VanillaSoft, Outreach, SalesLoft, any of those tools, right? That's the better question, not which is the better one, because it's multi-channel. And LinkedIn, obviously you can't leave out LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, like it's multi-channel, it's multi-threaded. And the question becomes capacity as it relates to the industry you're going into and selling into. And to a certain extent, where do they swim? If your people aren't on Twitter, then, tweeting about your company stuff isn't necessarily the right place to be. So not to say you shouldn't do it, but it may not be where you put all of your stuff there. Let's see, what was the other question? Oh, and one more thing. God, I hate that question. And I'll tell you why. 1, everybody says it. 2, it's never one more thing. People use it to make people stay on the phone all the time. Salesforce, I don't know if they still are, but they were notorious for it. Like they taught this stuff hardcore. And it worked. Look, I'm not saying it doesn't work. I still like it. Because as soon as I hear it, and again, I'm a different audience, right? I am not your average customer if you're trying to sell me, because I will absolutely go into judgment mode. Like that's just part of my game, right? So I hear things differently, but it's never just one more thing. It's annoying. If it happens twice, I can get away. I can be okay with you saying it once at the end of the conversation. However, I think it's misguided, because one more thing means you're not done selling, which means you missed an opportunity, which means you're now either delaying or coming back from what our next steps are. By the time I get to one more thing, I already want to know what my next steps are. I don't need there to be one more thing, right? I'm sure someone can come on and say, well, Richard, here's how you use it statistically or strategically. Okay, you've confirmed next steps, and then you want to ask this last question. I get it. If that works for you, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I just don't like it. I'm a little bit more cut and dry, and that's just sort of how my mindset works. So I don't like the and one more thing. Part of the, let's see, I got a question. As part of the respect contract, how do you like, is that unreasonable as compared to is that fair? I don't necessarily want to know if something's unreasonable, because now I'm having to defend somebody. This is my just instant reaction to the person who asked. They asked me privately, so I'm not going to name them. For me, and this is I think this is my psyche and how I operate. One, is that fair? Maybe I've just been saying it too long and I'm just so used to it and I like it in my script and I don't want to have to think about changing something. That's possible. I actually want to know, fairness to me shows a place where we're on an even playing field and there's an agreement. If you're comfortable using, is that unreasonable? Go for it. This is part of authenticity. This is the part where if that sounds more comfortable to you and it works the same way, go for it. Don't not do it because Richard doesn't like it. Like, know that that's just how Richard is. So I hope that's a answer. Or I hope that's a good answer for you. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. If another question comes in, let me know. If I miss something, Blake, let me know too, and we'll come back to it. Oops. So, question behind the question. We've already talked about this theoretically, well, specifically, but I want to give you a little bit more meat on that bone. So often our prospects don't ask the right questions, right? They used to be that, the customer is always right. Well, in my mind, the customer is always not right. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong. They just don't know what right is, right? The fact that they're asking for help and asking questions is good. Like, I want that. They just don't necessarily know how to ask the right questions, right? And that's not their fault. you see this a lot in evangelical sales, right? If you're in a new SaaS platform, if you're in something that never existed before, then that's where this is coming in, because they don't know how to buy this product or service. You'd be surprised how many times I talk to people, they don't know how to buy sales training. I'm talking to VPs of sales, head of sales, CROs, CEOs. And I had one guy last week sign up for this. He's like, Richard, I am coming back for some of this. 2 weeks ago I came, or 3 weeks ago I came to your session. I'm a busy CEO and I love that you're doing this, but could you condense this to an hour? Because I'm a busy guy, and I need to respond to him on email. And if you're listening, you're going to get this email. So sorry, not sorry. One, when I did this originally, and as I'm doing it now, I'm not necessarily doing it for everybody who has a job. I'm happy for those who do. I'm really trying to do it for folks who, might have been affected by COVID and need a little help and want to get something out of it, which, that's my big altruistic piece. I'm super honest. Yeah, of course, I hope it generates some leads. Duh, that's normal. But if a CEO is coming to me and telling me to condense the 2-3 hour sessions into 1 hour, okay, one, you can't learn sales that way. They've never bought sales before. They think you can read it in a book and go do it. They probably have some level of success as a CEO, but they're often not realizing that people are buying you, the human CEO, and your passion and dream and your vision. They're not buying your product or service. They're buying their trust in you. And that's just because of your title. Right? Imagine if you gave every one of your salespeople the title of co-founder. Right? Imagine that. How much more trust would instantly be created from that in your buyer's mindset? So that's the difference. So anyway, so I hope that makes sense for everybody, and we'll go from there. But customers don't ask the right questions. They don't know how to ask them. They know how to get started on the path, though, and we have to lead them through that path, and that's what we're working on. So question behind the question, right? There's a picture's worth 1,000 words. The mind, you can go Google this, by the way, the mind processes 3,000 thoughts an hour. Now you're all sitting here going, oh my God, I'm going to Google that. Is he serious? I'm going to Google it right now. Now you're starting to type it in. Like, that's 3,000 thoughts in an hour. So again, I said earlier, there's a challenge, when there's a picture in someone's head and it gets lost by the time it comes out of their mouth. So the reason for a question is often more compelling and interesting than the question itself, right? I could have easily turned around on the question of, is that unreasonable? And I could turn around and say, hey, what made you ask that question? And whoever asked that question would have painted a picture and said, oh, here's how I'm using it. I want to use it this way. This is why I like using it. That's way better than should I use the phrase unreasonable, right? And so this is why I call it the question behind the question. There's always a question behind what they're asking. And I want to get them to admit what their real problem is, or what their challenge is, or what's really on their mind. Right? That's the piece in sales. So these are the questions. Can your service do this? How do I do that? Right? So yes, my service can do this. What makes you ask that question? Right? How do you compare to so-and-so? Oh, we're just like so-and-so, and we do this better. Oh, no, we can't do what they're doing. How important is that to you to making this decision? So every time someone asks you a question, you've earned the right to ask one back. So I do want people to answer truthfully and honestly at all times, particularly in competitive situations, right? I want to avoid as much as possible, well, it depends. If someone's asking you something direct about your competitor, you should already know the answer to it. Don't look to rebut it right away. Don't try to distract them with some other shiny butterfly penny object, right? Don't go, well, no, but here's what we do instead. Say, actually, we don't. Let's talk about that. How important is that? What do you like about that feature? How are you currently handling that situation? What is that one thing helping you do better than what you're currently doing? Like, you need to dive deep on that stuff, right? You got to go deep. You can't ignore it. That's the worst thing. These are the ways I do it. Hey, it does do that perfectly. If you don't mind, what would make me ask question? Actually, what use case are you thinking of when you ask that question? I know there's the phrase use case, people won't like it. It's okay. You don't have to like it or use it. So now my question for you, and I'll turn it over. What questions do your customers or your prospects ask you? And let's do a little bit of role play. Or if you've got, hey, Richard, now that I understand this, I want to role play it with you out loud.
Just let me know who it is, Rich. I'll take them off.
Come on, somebody's got a question. Just type it in. I'll role play it by myself with Blake. I'll talk to myself. It'll be very entertaining, I promise. What questions do your customers ask you or your prospects? You can send it privately as well.
There are no questions, apparently.
Someone will ask. We'll wait. All right, Maddie's working on it. Service, quality of products, turnaround time. Can you, all right, Oren, here's a good one. Can you integrate with Active Directory? My training does not actually integrate with Active Directory, but Oren, what are you trying to do by having it integrate with Active Directory? Very natural conversational flow, right? What are you trying to accomplish with that? Because what they're trying to accomplish with that integration is more important to me and even to them than whether or not I integrate. Doesn't matter. I need to know what they're trying to accomplish. So that's a good example. Thanks, Oren. Maddie, you still working on it? Or I assume you're typing furiously. Do you have customers in the XYZ space? Great question, Scott. I actually just won a deal in a place where I don't have customers. And the answer to that is, Scott, you know what? I don't have customers in there. How important is that in you in making this decision? Because remember, here's what I know when someone like Scott asks me that question. There's something about me they like, otherwise they wouldn't have been talking to me in the first place. So that's my leverage. My leverage is that I'm in the game, right? So asking that question is really important. What they're really trying to, usually in that space, and Scott, tell me if I'm wrong, or anybody, usually that means that they're just either A, trying to see if there's something different and better, or sorry, not different, but something better than what's out there. And B, they've already talked to somebody and now they're just trying to check a box because somebody asked them to check a box. So I've earned the right to ask a bunch of questions. Hey, I don't have people in that space, totally fair. Just out of curiosity, what made you ask that question? How important is that to you? Who else have you already talked to that's in the space? Now, if you're looking, Scott, if you're looking for somebody who's in the space, just out of curiosity, what made you want to talk with me? I'm happy to talk to you, but if that's what you want, I'm not going to lie to you about it. Now, all of a sudden, I built Scott a tremendous level of trust with Scott, that I'm not a bullshitter. I'm not going to waste his time. I'm going to be honest about every single thing. And now I can hammer home, at least in my world, why I'm better. The firm that the company I actually work with is a bunch of lawyers. It's a law firm looking for sales training. You can't imagine how excited I am to teach them how to ask better questions, right? So let's see. going back up to Maddie, your competitor is proposing 3 times the number of implementation hours that your proposal has. We're concerned you're not providing enough resources. Ooh, that's a really good one. All right, Maddie. So how I would handle that, because they're not really making a question. So I would probably turn around and go, okay, I hear. So Maddie, what's your question then? Because you didn't really ask me one. And then I would say, okay, let's go back to that for a second. They're charging, they're going to give you 3 times as many resources. Are they charging you 3 times as much? And they might say, no, they're charging the same. Okay. So now it's a pricing conversation. It's not a resource conversation. It's a pricing conversation. Right. And then you've got to be able to show and provide value as to why you don't need that and why they're overselling you or underselling you, or they're not as good at the job. If they need 3 times as many people to do it as we do, well, then I'd be concerned about how good their people are. I'd start planting that seed. So I would try to find ways to ask those questions back. So what makes you think it takes 3 times as many resources other than the fact that they're giving them to you? Right? So, and then ask, and I might even say, hey, is this a resource thing or is this really a pricing thing? Because it sounds to me like, depending on what they're charging, they're just giving you extra stuff because they want to win the deal. Right? So, but you want to have that conversation. You need to get into their head and their mindset of what is that question and why are they asking it? Where is it coming from? So, but yeah, Maddie, it is more of a challenge than a question, but I think that's okay. I think you can still spin that because we know what they're doing. They're asking you for more. You just need to get them to explain, well, what is it you're looking for then? Right? Because I'm happy to explore that, but right now you're just telling me something. This is a really good one from AJ. Now he's putting me on the spot. I'm good with that, AJ, by the way. And if it's Ajay, I apologize. I'm being very conscious of people's names. I have an online course. I have online courses, and we're working with training firm XYZ. We're already paying blank, blank, blank for services, and we're not sure if we need to explore another firm. Why do you think we should consider your firm? Well, my answer would be, you're right. I guess I don't know why you should consider my firm because you haven't even answered the first question, which is, why are you considering another firm? Is there something going on with the current one that makes you want to have this conversation in the first place? So in that instance, you've actually exposed a major pain. You basically said, maybe you're just shopping around and you're up for renewal. Well, that's fair. I'm not going to give you my price just for that to happen, right? But so I would be digging into, well, sounds to me like we need to explore why we're even having this conversation, why you're looking at something, why you're considering something different versus what you're already doing, if you're unsure you even need to do it. And so now I'm encouraging them to lean in, and they got to, for lack of a better phrase, they got to sell me on why I got to talk to them, as opposed to me just sort of jumping at the bait. So 9:44. So real quick, I'm going to monitor the chat for a second. Blake's going to jump off in about 15 minutes. So I want to let everybody know that if you don't know Blake Hudson, please follow him on LinkedIn. Super good guy. He's given up all this time, like Colin did, just to be supportive to this group. He shared a lot of knowledge. If you haven't listened to his podcast that we did on Surf and Sales last week, please go listen to it. It's really fascinating. But Blake, I want you to go in and talk about what is that? We're going to take a small segue, a little bit of a step back. What is that gap that we talked about in the podcast that's your concept? Because I really think it's important, and I think people will like to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that. And it really was a pleasure being on the podcast with you guys. The gap is called the gratitude gap. And a little bit of context, it's something that came about in a bit of a dark season for me in my sales career. It's kind of early on, and I was struggling with, I had that kind of quick success, and then quota changed on me as it tends to do in a startup. And I really didn't respond well to that. More importantly, a lot of my peers weren't responding well to that either. I always try and be someone that's more positive, optimistic. And so what I found and what really saved me through that time and helped me get through it was this idea that, all my peers were walking around and they were entitled. They felt entitled to a promotion. They felt entitled to new technology. They felt entitled to all these different things. And the crazy thing about entitlement is that you lose twice, because you're not satisfied with what you have and you're frustrated by what you've yet to receive. Where the gratitude gap comes in is that for myself, I was grateful. I was grateful to be in the city. I was grateful for the technology I had been given, grateful for the role and the fundamentals I was learning. And so I realized that the gap between your gratitude and your entitlement will determine your happiness. Now, if that gap gets out of whack and you've got your entitlement way above your gratitude, that's where you start to get frustrated. And so for me, it's been something that has really saved me throughout my entire career. And that is just looking for things to be grateful for, even in the problems. It could be as simple as, I got 5 no's today. I'm grateful I had 5 conversations. I can go back, dissect that, and figure out what happened. It's a mindset thing, and it really can help you get through difficult situations, professional or otherwise.
Yeah, I love that. I walked away from that one, and I told him he's got to go trademark it. So he needs to put it on a t-shirt. The reason I want to bring that up too is for those people I've been through what some people are going through. In 2008, 2009, I lost my job. I was making 6 figures, had to cut it in half to $50,000 a year and no health insurance, had a wife, who I still have. My first son had been born. We just bought a house, and I was grateful to have that job, right? Because in that moment, I was more concerned about a gap on my resume and ageism, my perceived concern around ageism. I was concerned around the longer I was out of job, the harder it would be to find one because of my age. So I took something, and I was grateful to take something just to be able to, 1, provide value, feel like I have worth, right? I think as a human, we all just want to do a job and feel worthy of those things. So if anyone's struggling out there right now, if anyone is in that spot with everything that's going on with COVID, please try to take what Blake has shared and look for those moments and acknowledge that, you may not get the base pay that you got in January because the world has changed. The economy has changed, but your self-worth means something. You're worth something. The next job you get isn't about the next job you get. It's about the 1-2 jobs from now. It's not even about the job after that. It's like, if I can get something now, well, what can I do in February or March next year or June next year? And then what can I do a year after that? So anyway, I know the frustrations are out there. We often feel entitled when if you're out of work and you're not having it, you feel like you deserve more. You probably do. Unfortunately, the market rate's just not doing it right now. And that's just something we have to get to and get through in the short term. So anyway, Blake, super helpful for you to be here today. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the role plays. Thanks for monitoring chat. Everybody go follow Blake. Super smart, fun guy. And yeah, he is kind of always that positive. Like, it's crazy. Like, he really is. It's amazing. When you go hear his story on the podcast, I promise you'll be like, wow, that kid's great. So really glad you could make it, Blake. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks everybody in the group for having me today. Appreciate it. We'll chat soon.
Yep. All right. So it is 9:52. So we can sort of plow through for the next half hour or so, or we could take a break for another 5 or 10 minutes. Obviously, you're adults. You can step away from the computer at any time. I'll sort of let the group decide if everybody wants a break, just to chill the mind, put it in the chat. If we're like, let's plow through, I'm okay with that too. Go ahead and type away. All right, I'm not getting anything in on the chat. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead. Let's go on. Let's roll. All right. So assigning accountability for the prospect, right? We showed this yesterday, so I'm not going to spend as much time on it, but I do want to answer questions if people have it from yesterday, right? So assuming I understand the ego states, assuming I've done a good respect contract, I've asked better open and closed-ended questions, I'm using question behind the question, I've gotten to the end of my conversation, I've determined next steps, now I want to assign accountability to them. And so for me, this is that super hyper structured email. It should be in the handout or the workbook that was sent out. And I know a lot of people tend to do something like this. So if you have, great. If there's something that's missing, great. I am just sort of curious at this point for feedback. If there's somebody new who couldn't join yesterday but joined today and you're like, Richard, what the heck is this? Go ahead, ask. Go ahead, I promise. You can send it privately or to the group and I'll happy to re-explain it. But my goal here is to try and put accountability back on the prospect, right? Every time I talk to them, they get this email. Every time I talk to them, I reply to this email. I might even go adjust the subject line to put the latest date. Like if I've been talking to someone in May or April and it's still going on in June, I might go put the date up there in the subject line at the beginning, just so they can sort of see that this is the most common thread. I'm curious, what kind of stuff isn't in here that people do put in there? Or what kind of things are in here that you haven't put in that you're now thinking about putting in? So feel free and by all means use a raise the hand feature or go into the chat and I'll be glad to, I can monitor everything. So. What was the, yeah, if I feel it, yeah. So yesterday I talked, I changed that top line to say, if you could please respond and let me know I captured everything correctly. So now I'm actually encouraging them to take action. And I'm actually making them take two actions. One is they got to read it. Well, maybe three. Then they got to comprehend it. So they got to do a little bit more than skim it. They got to pay attention to it. And then they've got to respond. Challenges, I did not do it, but would moving forward. Osaro, I don't know if it's Osaro or Ryan, used this today for the first time and it really helped. Would love to know more about that, or Ryan, what that meant for you. You should be able to do that. Scott, have I ever gotten negative pushback? Well, there are two kinds of negative in this. One is, did I miss something and did they correct me? Which, yes, I've gotten that once or twice. But I'm not offended by it. I'm kind of glad. Have I ever gotten someone to say, don't send me this again? No. I've had a couple of people, it's interesting, when I go and teach this, this email's long, right? Scott, I bet that's what you're wondering about. But this email is really long and people will say, well, God, I'll say to them, hey, you got this for me. What did you think? And I know they're either going to go, oh, this is great. Or they're going to say, well, Richard, it was really long. And I'll go, yeah, but I'm here. And so we know it works, right? So I think that's a really important piece, is that I'm okay with it being long. It's actually written to make it look short. If you look at it, it's specifically structured with a name, 2 sentences, and then my signature. And then it maybe looks like there's just a little bit of stuff. So hold on one second, Shane. Ryan Tanaka. Let me find you, Ryan. Anyway, I noticed I was too scared to put concrete details in. So today I made sure to talk about the timeline, make sure it was clear with the prospect. So here's my question. Do you feel like it encouraged you to ask those questions? Yeah. So hold on a second. There you are. I wonder if Blake forgot to make me co-host. He did. All right. Well, can't do anything about it. So that's the important piece. So one, it helps you become better. Additional resources. So I'll tell you something. Those additional resources have been in my email for a long time, and I can track the clicks. Nobody's clicked on them for I can't tell you how long. Now, Does it create a grounding effect? Meaning, wow, Richard's sending me some stuff to help me understand how to buy better? Maybe. I haven't really studied that. So, but I can tell you that for me, I had no discernible data to tell me that they're clicking on those literally in the last year. But maybe to your point, it's added value, Marcus. I appreciate that. The other thing I will say is that when I get on a call with someone, this is a template, so a lot of the stuff is set up. I will say, hey, Ryan, just so you know, any typing you hear me doing is me taking a ton of notes of this conversation. And by the way, I'm going to send you an email with all these notes when we're done. I just want you to know I'm not over here checking emails or doing something on Facebook. And I always get a little chuckle and a giggle, and people know. I'm a hard typer in general. Just I guess because when I was in high school, we had to actually type hard. So I know they're hearing the clicks, so I want them to make sure, I don't want them to hear that and let them think that they can be distracted too. So anyway, so just so you know, I do tell people I'm taking these notes, and I do tell them I'm sending this to them. So this email, in my opinion, is a reason that people choose me. It's not just because of what I do, but it's how I do it, right? And that's a really important piece in all sales, particularly if you're in a commoditized world, particularly if you're in a highly competitive world. How you conduct yourself in business is equally valuable as to what pains you actually solve. So some headsets block out the typing more. Yep. I still like to say it because I don't know if they do or they don't. I don't know if mine does or doesn't. But I also know that they can kind of tell I might be a little distracted. We kind of can tell when people are taking notes in general when you're in a conversation. So I think that's really an important piece of all this. So any other questions around this, or we'll go forward? And Scott, I do have a question for you because you asked, did I ever get any negative feedback? What kind of negative feedback came to mind when you were asking that question? Or what was your concern? All right, Scott might be typing something in, so we'll go forward and then we'll come back to it if he does. All right, breakup emails. We're getting close to the end, so we'll end a little early today. So, right, we know, and I love this too, because Morgan Ingram, if you don't follow Morgan Ingram, follow him. You can't have breakup emails if you've never talked to somebody, right? If you've never talked to them, you can't really break up with them, right? You can press pause, right? And so you can take this and sort of recreate some press pause moments. But this is something I've written. You can now Google breakup emails and find all kinds of them. My theory when I wrote this a couple of years ago was that, it takes 15 touches to get someone in the pipeline or in a conversation, but we're going to try and break up with them with one email. And God knows that email about being chased by a hippo or being slammed under a vending machine is no longer working. So, Scott, I'm going to come back to you. I see you put the comment in there, so we'll go into that at the end. So this is my favorite first breakup email. So keep in mind, before I send this email, I've had a conversation, maybe with Scott, sent him my big long email, maybe even had a second conversation. And then I probably already emailed him saying, hey, Scott, I had a note to contact you this week about next steps, and he hasn't responded. And maybe I've left him a voicemail. So by the time I send this, while this is definitely the first breakup email, it's probably my third or fourth attempt to get Scott back on the phone. And I get notes from monthly on this that, hey, Richard, this is still really good. This one's still working. Subject line is, are you okay? Right? Haven't heard from you in a while. Want to make sure everything's okay with you. Please let me know if the next best step so I'm not a pain in your inbox. It's a really great question. You're trying to be a little bit more human. I think in the current COVID situation and the social justice situation, I think it's totally appropriate that you can ask, are you okay? People are being affected by all this stuff, right? I don't think it's too personal. I think it shows that you're a human. And by the fact that you're saying, are you okay? and just saying, hey, I don't want to be a pain. You're not bringing up any business. You're not dropping any value. You're not doing anything other than just see where things stand. I think is really important. In all the years I've been doing this, I've had one client respond to me and said, wow, thank you so much for sending that. My father just had a heart attack. So I've been dealing with that, and I'm sorry for the delay and all that stuff. Well, in that instance, that's a very vulnerable moment. I can now have a vulnerable moment, having had, challenges with my own dad and his health, and just, send him wishes and tell him like, hey, totally understand, when do you want me to contact you? Now I can ask him very directly, when do you want me to contact you? You need to go take care of your family, and you don't need to deal with my, silly little email, right? So that one works really well. Second one is a multiple choice question. This goes along the lines of the joke, but gets rid of the joke. This works sometimes. It's not great, but because I need 6 or 7 touches, I'm okay with sending some that I know just aren't going to get a response. In this instance, when I used it, I actually did get a response. Hey, I'm too busy trying to get the product out the door. Can you give me a couple of weeks? So I know this stuff works. Third one, professional courtesy of a reply. Now this is a fun one. People are probably freaking out going, oh my God. So a couple of things. So one, you'll notice that my email started with a certain low level of intensity, and they're now gradually increasing the pressure. That's by design. So first I said, are you okay? They ignored me. Remember, that's my 3rd or 4th attempt to get back in touch with them. The multiple choice questions getting a little bit more specific. And that's probably my 4th or 5th time to get a response out of them, not just the second breakup email. Well, now, look, I've invested time. I've totally put my efforts into this. And, God damn it, yeah, I do deserve the professional courtesy of a reply. So I've got to be willing to risk this one. And I'll give you a different subject line in a second. But if you read the email, I'm just asking for an answer, right? I'm just asking, let me know so I can, move on. I don't do maybes, right? Yes, no, maybe. I don't do maybes. And I'm asking for that courtesy of reply. I've never once had someone tell me they were offended by it. That doesn't mean that they weren't. But it also tells me that they know that I'm right. And I'm okay with that. Now, I work for myself. If someone wants to complain to me, then, go complain. You want to complain to my boss? It's me, right? You want to go chastise me on social media? Fine. But I'm going to tell them what happened too. Like, I'm going to respond. Like, don't think you're going to get away with it. So I'm a little bit of a dick that way. So if you're working for an organization, your company may not want you to send this email, and you have to respect that. You absolutely need to, because the brand is more important in that instance. So the subject line I encourage other people to say is status update requested, please. Right? Or just status update requested. I don't think there's anything unprofessional about it. I think it sends the same level of intensity without, poking somebody in the eye. And I don't think it's an offensive line. And a lot of people have been, people are probably scribbling to write that down to go, okay, good, that's better. I like that. I'm more comfortable with that. So, and I've never gotten any pushback because I ask people to give me feedback on these when they use them. So that's my third one. This is the Chris Voss one. Sorry for the dog barking in the background. But this is the Chris Voss one. I've yet to actually see this work. I know he swears by it in his book, Never Split the Difference. I've talked to some sales leaders, and they've told me the same thing. Very few people have said it works, but I'm okay to use it. It could also be out of sequence. Maybe it needs to be a 2nd or 3rd attempt, not my 4th one, right? Good question, Oren. I'll come back to you in a second on that. But again, if I need 5 or 6 of them, it's okay if they don't respond. Going around or going above someone, there's 2 ways to do this one. First one is, if I've talked to one person and I think I need to go around them, I'll do it by telling them I'm going to go around them, right? And our subject line says, I'll try someone else. Hey, John, I know we've had some conversations over the last few weeks about interest. Each time you said you want to do it, but we've never gotten the next steps. I appreciate you're super busy. At this point, I'll work on speaking with others in the organization to see if I can get some traction. My goal is not to offend you. In fact, it's the opposite. I want to capitalize on your enthusiasm to move us forward. I would actually add into here now, if I don't hear back from you within the next week, I'll go ahead and do that. I wish you all the best. Now, again, there's a risk factor in this one. If you're Richard and you work for yourself, I'm not that concerned. If you've got an organization where there's a concern, then you need to respect the organization 100%. But I don't think it's inappropriate to ask, to tell someone you're going to do this. If you send this to them and they go a week and they don't respond to you, and you've seen they've opened the email, right? Because we're all using some, attribution tool at this point. Well, then in my opinion, they've given you permission to go forward, right? You have to decide if you want to run that risk. How I go forward to the next person is really important. I might go to Sarah, right, who's John's supervisor, and say, hey, Sarah, is John okay? I might go back to my first email. Siri thought I said, hey, Siri. So I might say, is John okay? Had some communications with John. There was some interest around training. Haven't heard back from him, which is okay if the project's been paused. But I just want to make sure something doesn't fall through the crack. So how I go around someone is also really important. I know that Sarah's going to forward that to John, and I'm going to hear back from John, right? Now, if I've offended John, then I can backpedal as much as I need to. But, respectfully, by the time John gets this email, it's like the 8th time I've tried to get a hold of John. Come on, John, get with the program. So we'll come back to that in a second, Maddie. Last attempt, right? Subject line, last attempt. Haven't heard from you in a while. This will be my last attempt to communicate for now, right? You can even take out the for now if you want to. Should you be interested in continuing, please let me know. I'm always happy to re-engage, right? So I'm a big fan of that last sentence. If you ever want to reopen the dialogue, if priorities shift, let me know. I'm happy to re-engage. It's a good way to end it. So I want to come back to some of these questions that have come up. So give me a second. Let's see, I want to come back, I think, to Scott. So Scott's email had to do with that summary email. My thought is that someone might feel tied to these when they say they may not be invested, but I guess good discovery unearths all that. That's your whole point, Scott. Yes, that's exactly it. Look, if I have to go through a whole process and send that big email and then it's decided they're going to move forward with someone else, well, then I need to examine myself to see what I missed. But at least I've left them with a really good, a really good feeling. To Mac, do you set the trigger in email so that you get a notification when the email is opened? All my emails let me know when they're opened, right? So yes, I think that's good. I think in an SDR particular capacity, as soon as I see an email is opened, I want to dial. I've actually talked to Rob Foreman at SalesLoft about this and said, why can't SalesLoft just dial the phone number as soon as the email's open? I know they're by their phone. There's a pretty good chance they're reading it on their phone, right? I can't remember, maybe they've done it, I don't know. But to me, that seems like a logical thing. I can pull off, oh, wow, what a coincidence, right? That's no big deal. So that's sort of my thought on those kinds of things. Let's see, cadence. So the question was, what's the cadence of these emails? I think that's up to the organization and you. I think it's super important that for me, I'll drop them out every other day because I'm ready to but again, I'm in sales. I'm a sales trainer. People know what I'm doing. So I have a little bit of a luxury in that regards that people understand I'm trying to get to the point. If they get annoyed with me, I'm going to go, great, but I got you to respond, right? So now we know what we need to tweak when I train your team. Every other day is too much, right? I can make an assumptive close. So again, I live in a different world and I recognize that. I do think 2 a week is appropriate in most cases because you're trying to get an answer, right? You can also have another set of emails in this, meaning that you may have two partners who are involved in this, and you could send one to one, to one person and another one to another person. Got a question. Hey, a company did this to me, talked to your boss email, and it felt really personal and threatening. I just started my role and had some conflict getting back to the organization about how to move forward. It worked, and my boss wasn't mad at me for me to take my time, but it was really stressful. So as the client, well, yeah, guess what? It's stressful for me as a salesperson too when you don't respond. So my question now, come back to you, is does that affect your desire to actually work with that client? And if it does, well, that's the risk someone's going to have to consider and take, right? For me, I'm okay with that, right? So, but that's sort of the best way I sort of see those things. And again, it's nothing, it doesn't sound like it harmed anything. Sounds like your boss was appreciative of it. Hopefully you're appreciative of it. If not, that's okay too. Like, you know, if it's offended you, you're allowed to be offended. There's nothing wrong with that. So, let's see. Good point. Let's see. Just trying to get to these. How many emails for a trail of 7 days would work the best in sequence? That's a really good question. That's too specific for me to answer. I think it depends on your sales cycle. It depends on your relationship with people. You know, as I've built it into systems, right, you know, into a communications platform or a sales enablement platform. At most, I go 3 to 4 days, right? And that's 3 to 4 calendar days, not business days, right? So I'm not opposed to something getting sent on the weekend, right? We all sort of know that emails get opened and read on the weekends. Those are good days to get a hold of people. So I just sort of want it every 3 to 4 days at max. Anything longer than that, and I'm afraid they're not going to know who I am. Let's see. Breakup email works every time. If they respond, they're usually very apologetic. Well, I'm glad to know that. It hasn't worked every time for me, but I'm glad that it is for you. And I do agree with you. They're often very apologetic. In most of these cases, you get the apology. Oh, I'm really sorry. I've been tied up with this. Which is fine. Like, you know, when they give me those answers, I'm like, hey, no problem. I understand. Thanks for letting me know, you know, and now you can try to re-engage that dialogue. So I think I got all the questions. If not, someone feel free to copy and paste them, and I'll be glad to look at them. Well, I didn't mean to do that, but here we are. We are at the end. This is me. This is my legit cell phone number. That if you texted me right now, I'd get it. If you called me right now, it'd ring right here. I'm happy to help. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on Twitter. Connect with me on Instagram. Connect with me on Patreon. Get a free shirt if you want one of those. The recordings are being done. We'll get them uploaded. You'll get a thank you email from me either today or tomorrow with a link to where the recordings are. You're welcome to share it. If there's any other last minute emails, I'm more than happy to stay on, or any other questions, I'm happy to stay online. I'm sorry I can't figure out how to unmute everybody, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yesterday we had a good 15 or 20 people stay on. It was really, really cool. My last request, if this has been helpful, please go to G2 Reviews. Give me a review. I appreciate it. It means a lot to me if someone's willing to take the time. And I'll leave it there and see if there's any other questions. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate everyone's time. And I'll hang out. Will the slides be shared as well? Not the actual answers to this, not the full slides. There's some IP issues around some of that with my IP and some others that I have permission to use, that I can't just give it out. But I appreciate the ask. Thank you, everybody who's given me all these nice words. Benjamin, thank you. John, thank you. I know a bunch of other people said thanks. Any other questions? Can't find you, G2. The Harris Consulting Group. The Harris Consulting Group. Let's see, there's a couple questions coming in. Advice, questions to ask to get access to authority. Great question, Liz. This is one of my favorite questions to ask. Who else is affected by this decision? I don't want to know who's involved in it. I want to know who's affected. Because lots of times people are affected, but you don't ever get a chance to talk to them. There could be a security review, right? The CFO might be affected by it. Marketing might be affected because some of it's coming from their budget. So asking who else is affected by this decision is a great question. You can then say, well, who else helps make this decision? How do y'all normally make this kind of decision? When was the last time you made a decision? How many people are involved? Liz, you can easily go and say, look, statistics say it's between, 5 and 7.8 times pi divided by the square root of 4. Number of people are involved in this decision. How do y'all make decisions, right? Who else do I need to engage? You could even say this, Liz. Hey, Liz, seems like you really like this. If you like it, who might say no to us, and how can I help you present this to them? Those are all great questions. So I hope that was helpful. Let's see. Was this what you present when someone brings you in? Some of it, yes. There's more to it. There's actually a whole other day that I could do. There's a ton more techniques and tactics that I go in, but this is a big piece of it, yes. What makes you ask that question? See what I did there? So, let's see. Couldn't type, huge help. Okay, great. Any other questions? I love how 38 people are sitting here waiting for someone else to ask a good question. Come on, folks. You got to have a question if you're sitting there waiting. One-on-one training. I have started doing some one-on-one coaching. Feel free to hit me up. I'm happy to talk about it. How did you get my phone number? That's my job, Andy. So that's one answer. The other answer is my company provides the phone numbers. I'm concerned, Andy, though, but what's your biggest fear when you get that question? Yeah, Liz, Michael needs to come with you, send you down to Surf and Sales next time. So. What else can I tell you? Anybody? If you're working with a group and the main decision maker isn't responding, what would be your approach and strategy? Well, hopefully somewhere in those conversations I've asked, who's my point person? And hopefully somewhere in there I've had, someone else has asked me a question, or I've spent a little bit of time in the conversations with the group where I've built enough rapport that I would go to that person and say, hey, I haven't heard from somebody. Is everything okay with them? I think that's fine. I'm also not afraid to the peer pressure response of like, hey, everybody, haven't heard back from y'all in a while. I'm not sure if priorities have shifted and John's no longer the person in charge. I just want to make sure that something doesn't fall through the cracks. If someone could let me know, I'd appreciate it. John, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. Just want to make sure I'm staying on top of it for everyone. And I think people will get that. Those are a couple of approaches. People screen all the time. So my concern in Sweden. So my concern is when I get someone who actually picks up, I don't want to burn an active number. I guess, what's the question there though? That's a little bit more of a statement. These are all really good questions. I'll wait for the response on that one. How do you make sure that you're on top of the prospect's mind without a marketing nurturing? Then that's a human nurture, right? I'm a big fan of, hey, just saw this article about your industry. Hope all's well. I'm totally cool with you sending an email that asks for nothing in return. Totally cool with that being in part of the prospecting email, outbound approach. right, for your SDRs. Hey, this is really interesting. Thought you'd like it. Make sure it's not quite that generic so that it doesn't look like one of those, spam emails or something. Hey, read this about your boss, read this about your company, saw this happening in your industry. I think those value added are really, really important. Hey, we just released this case study. Don't worry, not asking you for a meeting, but I thought you'd find it interesting. Anytime, my favorite thing to do is to add value, and then I'll specifically say, don't worry, I'm not asking for a meeting. So now that rule of reciprocity, that angst that they feel like they have to even respond and say thank you, they don't even have to do that. And so for me, I think that sends a very strong and important message to them. Let's see. How do you do just sales without brand and marketing support, but in a competitive landscape? To the person who asked that question, quit. Go find someone where there actually is a place that will give you support and brand and marketing. Your talents are too good to be wasted trying to make someone else a millionaire and a billionaire because they don't want to put the money and investment into what you're trying to do for them. So that's my first answer. The second is, then you have to create it. You have to create your own version of the brand. You have to start promoting yourself as part of the brand. You have to start promoting the content, the quality, and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, it's in your power. Like, I wouldn't want to stay there. So, and it's not your fault as much as they might try to make you feel that way. No. So, when working with prospects that are using a legacy competitor and that said the company is not doing well, right? They've got some debt, horrible Moody's report. How would you broach this with the prospect to get seriously evaluated? I would be super direct, Maddie. I would definitely say, hey, based on what I've seen in the marketplace, things aren't going well. I am curious. If things aren't going well, it feels like y'all should be looking at something different, right? Why wouldn't you want to take a look at something different? We're not going to make it worse. Like, I would call somebody out on it, right? And I'd probably put more thought into it than I just did in that quick 30-second thought, but that's their job. That's part of it. I would also say I try and go above them. I absolutely would go. And now I wouldn't throw them under the bus. I might go to the CEO, the founder. I might go to somebody on the board and says, hey, I just read this Moody's report and I know you're using this competitor. Here are 10 reasons why we're better than them, but we can't seem to get a serious evaluation. I'm sure people are freaked out and panicked, but this is part of the change. That's one thing. The other thing is that you also might have to wait. You might have to wait till someone's let go, because when the new person comes in, they're going to be the instigator of change. They're going to be brought in because things are bad or were bad, and they're supposed to fix it. So I hope that gives you some solid advice. What else? I'm in moving in, let's see what that one is. I'm in moving and storage. How do you spark interest when the company isn't thinking of moving or has changed their plans completely due to COVID? I'll be super honest. You change industries, right? I'm a victim of this, not of moving and storage. I used to sell, back in the late 90s, I used to sell classified ads, right? In the newspaper, stuff in the back of the paper. The internet came out. This little company opened up. My mom said, you should go look at this company out in California. They're kind of selling like classified ads. And I said, oh yeah, what's the name of that company? This is 96 or 97. She's like, oh, the company's name is Yahoo. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I should have changed industries. Imagine where I'd be right now if I had changed industries back then. They were already public. That's okay. But I can assure you I would have gone to some other places, right? So if the world and the environment has changed and your industry is that affected, and granted, I don't want anybody to quit without another job, then it's up to your company to start to make the adjustments for you. And if they don't make the adjustments, when the economy changes, of course you're going to leave because they didn't treat you right. For all those CEOs and founders who aren't adjusting compensation models, who aren't figuring out ways to keep their employees and make them happy. And granted, I understand you may have to go through layoffs. I'm not discounting that. But if you're trying to run a status quo in this current status, I wouldn't want to work for you. Sorry. Like, you need to make the adjustments, right? You know, that's the deal. So that's my answer. Sorry if that's not the answer you wanted. But if the industry's that affected, you know, if I were selling restaurant supply equipment right now, that's a tough thing to be selling right now. Like, it's tough, right? It's scary to want to leave. You may not want to leave. I'm not saying you have to leave, but I don't know if you need a bigger sign from whatever it is you believe in spiritually than that to say it might be time to leave. So I'll leave it there on that one. Let's see, another message. What are some things to consider if you're, if you're trying to acquire your first 10 clients, SaaS product, no case studies yet? Give it away. Absolutely give it away. I've been saying this for COVID, since COVID started. If you didn't start doing free trials that were very specific, it's 90-day pilot. We expect at the end of 90 days that we're going to get a yes or no for a paid program moving forward. And that in addition to giving it to you for free for 90 days, you're going to write us a case study and give us a quote. That's what you should be doing. That's my honest opinion. If you can't sell them, if you can't close the revenue. But I would say this even if it was a non-COVID world. If you're brand new, you need stories. You don't need revenue. Now, if you max out your credit card and you're at that stage, that's fine. But I would even go to my Series A investors and say, look, we're going to go get the first 10 stories and we're not going to charge for it. And they're going to go, why? And I was like, because I can take 10 stories and turn that into 100, right? I would get super specific also. What are my 2 to 3 target verticals so that I have 2 or 3 case studies per vertical, not 10 customers and 10 verticals. That's too much. You can't do that much. That's not how I think you should be doing it. As a startup, you should have no more than 3 to 4 primary verticals you focus on and you own. You cannot be everything to everybody. Even if you think you can, you're not solving horizontal pains as a startup. You're solving vertical pains very specifically. So, all right, I'll hang out for another minute or two and then we'll get going. And if I miss something, please copy and paste it real quick. All right, everybody, I'm going to end it. Say thank you so much. Again, please feel free to go. I would love a G2 review if you're willing. It's not required. If there's something I can do, this is my contact information. Always happy to help and have a conversation. Thanks, everybody.